This is the On the Pony Express podcast, part of the On3 network. Check out all the SMU coverage you need at onthePonyExpress.com. Now, here's your host, Billy Embody. Billy Embody. 1, 2, 3, let me go.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. I'm Billy Embody. Thanks for joining me. Wanted to talk a lot about SMU basketball today as the Mustangs exited early from the AAC Tournament. And we'll talk about some other things, including a new commitment for SMU Football. But first, we are presented by our friends at StatusJet, statusjet.com. You could head over there to see what David Henry and his entire team can do for you in the private jet space, whether you're looking to buy or sell a plane or find a new company to help you get from point A to point B with that level of high quality service you'd expect in a charter experience. StatusJet is the place where you need to go. Call them 866-902-4124. Mention the code PonyUpACC or on theponyexpress.com, and you can get a discount on a round trip flight wherever you go. They'll work it out with you and be able to take care of you. But their team over there at StatusJet is set on helping you get from point A to point B with a level of luxury that you'd expect. They handle all the details. They're meticulous, and we love being able to say we're proud partners with StatusJet, which is also a proud supporter of SMU athletics. Before we jump into SMU basketball, as many of you, and I would say most of you, listen for the most part for the football side of things, but we do like to jump into basketball, of course. But we'll save that for a little bit because that'll probably end up being a long segment, let's just say. But SMU football got good news last weekend when the Mustangs landed Kam Cullins from the state of Georgia. He's a defensive lineman from North Cobb High School and somebody that I got a chance to lay eyes on as he was at SMU football practice last week before announcing his commitment, and checks the box, size, length. He's about 6'2", 270. He's got really long arms, and he tested very well at the Under Armour Atlanta camp that was held earlier this year. And that's really a piece of this too. And Calvin Thibodeau and Scott Simons really liked him from his production and size standpoint. And so that's why they went ahead and pressed for him and took his commitment. He's got one other Power 5 offer from Maryland, but a bunch of offers from programs around the country in the FBS ranks. And I do think that he'll add some other offers. I know Louisiana Tech jumped into the mix with him just after his commitment to SMU. I think he's got the athletic traits that you want from a defensive lineman. And so for SMU to get him on board when they did was important for them because they need to stock up on defensive linemen. We know that. And Scott Simons, Calvin Thibodeau, the whole defensive staff is working on that in a big way as SMU will once again need to retool that defensive line. And it was important to get that ball rolling. And so they've got some other big targets out there. They've got some guys coming in for official visits at some point, which we'll cover. But they do get defensive line commit number 1 in Kam Cullins. And I spoke with him, and he and his dad were very, very excited about SMU and getting this opportunity to come to Dallas from Atlanta. And I think I could say this, talking with some SMU coaches, they were pretty clear about how they felt about expanding their recruiting network for SMU into the Atlanta area, into South Florida, with those areas that are relatively accessible by airplane to get to Dallas. They can recruit Louisiana a little bit more. They have a bigger regional footprint, and even they've kind of gone up in Nashville a little bit. Places where when you're a power program, you can attract talent to maybe leave their home state or leave their close by area because you can get to a Dallas pretty easily on a plane, or you can be able to say, hey, we're going to play a game or two close by during your career, maybe every year, every other year, so that your family and friends can make that trek to see you play. And in SMU's case, they'll eventually play Georgia Tech, for example, in Atlanta. And so Kam Cullins will be on campus with an opportunity to do that. At least I haven't looked down the line in the 7-year schedule, but I'm pretty sure he will be able to do that. So those are the benefits of having this Power 5 moniker next to SMU's name now as they continue to dive into recruiting. And so I'm intrigued to see where this goes. Do they pick up more guys from Georgia now that Kam Cullins has at least jumped on board? Do we see them be able to find those national guys that are the right fits at SMU and get them committed for the class of 2025? The odds are they're going to do what they've done, which is sign a majority of their high school prospects from the state of Texas, in particular from Dallas. But Kam Cullins, especially when you're a defensive lineman, and it is hard to find defensive linemen from the high school ranks, you've almost got to just keep shooting your shot at different guys that you feel like have the length, size, and athleticism to play and contribute. And SMU felt that way about Kam Cullins with his commitment and visit. So he's really excited to be a Mustang. And you can catch our story on theponyexpress.com. We'll have more breakdown of him. He is a prospect that kind of has flown under the radar well enough where he isn't ranked yet, but he will be ranked by us at some point here soon. And we'll get the breakdown from our rankings team on what they see, where they project him and things like that. But he does have the length that you want. He's got the athleticism checked as well. So newest SMU commit is Kam Cullins. SMU does rank in the top 25 classes of 2025 still with that commitment as well. So as SMU dives deeper into this class of 2025, you're going to want to head over to ontheponyexpress.com. We're breaking down, it seems like, a new prospect every week that is locked in an official visit with Rhett Lashley and his staff. In particular, that May 17th weekend is shaping up to be an absolutely monster recruiting weekend. Double-digit prospects hitting campus on May 17th. Multiple 4-stars, big-time targets, guys that if you're a recruitnik following SMU recruiting, you've seen and heard their name for quite some time now in the recruiting world of list of targets that SMU has. And so they're going to host most of their top targets. They're going to host every single one of their in-state commitments that weekend as well. So that includes Keelan Russell, who is, of course, a little bit of a hot button right now with where his commitment stands. But the plan is May 17th weekend to have some of these top targets on the hilltop and getting them around the commitments, getting them around the coaches, and hoping to come away with multiple commitments, obviously, and really get this class of 2025 even more elevated than it already is starting out early on in the month of March 2024. Got about a year until signing classes are all done and spoken for and all of those things. But SMU is going into the rest of 2025 with a little bit of a change at the top of their recruiting department. And this isn't necessarily new from the standpoint of SMU does have general manager J.R. Sandlin running the show for the recruiting department, but now it kind of becomes more official with SMU having Alex Brown head to the Ole Miss Rebels of the SEC. So Alex Brown has left the program. The director of scouting, senior director of scouting, is now going to join Lane Kiffin's staff. And for people who probably see this and have known Alex since he was at SMU, your immediate reaction is going to be, wow, that's a big piece. And yes, I mean, a big piece without a doubt to this entire department is headed to Ole Miss. Alex did a really nice job from a scouting perspective and helped SMU hit on some of these transfers that they needed to, without a doubt. And we'll see how some of his scouting in the high school ranks works out as those guys continue to develop and things like that. And look, scouting is an interesting thing because you have that mix between what the coaches want and who the coaches want. And, you know, a guy like an Alex Kilgore, an absolutely no-brainer type of guy that they go down to Houston and they get. Scott Simons, who was the linebackers coach at the time, helped get on board. But then you also have some of these under the radar types, and you kind of go a little bit more national. And how do you find them? Your scouting department in some cases. And so working with the coaches, that is a piece of it. But Alex did a really nice job organizing the scouting department. What J.R. Sandlin will now bring to the table is he fully gets to oversee everything when it comes to SMU's recruiting and player personnel departments. He's the general manager of SMU football. He arrived earlier this spring from Oklahoma, where he helped them assemble back-to-back top 10 classes, and he's really well thought of. And you'll see him on Twitter. He's very active, and he's got a huge following, a huge social media platform for him there. But he spent 2 years as the director of player personnel and recruiting, and that's leading OU's recruiting efforts behind the scenes. And for a heavily focused on recruiting head coach like Brent Venables, that is a large role when it comes to a coaching staff is having that title. I mean, when guys are in recruiting, they want a DPP title. I mean, that is when you are that position, then the next step is kind of being that general manager, which SMU's made J.R. Sandlin. So he is somebody that is going to oversee everything when it comes to SMU. And the big thing that a lot of OU guys have hit on when I've talked about J.R. Sandlin to them is this guy is super organized, and everybody has good things to say. And when you follow him on Twitter, I mean, again, very active, very detailed on Twitter, and doesn't take days off in that sense. But when you meet the guy and you get around him, there are a lot of people that, and I've seen it too, our limited interaction since he's been on campus, very, very organized, wants to maximize what SMU can get out of its recruiting efforts. That can be low hanging fruit, like, hey, when we're done with staff, let's jump on FaceTime, just kind of keeping recruiting the main thing. And sometimes as coaches, not that SMU did this, trust me, but you miss opportunities to just say, hey, thinking about you, let's keep in constant contact. That organization level between that and visits and making sure those run smoothly, that is kind of what J.R. Sandlin is overseeing, along with now overseeing the scouting department, is what I understand. He's going to be watching and making that group his own, and kind of looking at who to either promote or bring in, and all of those things that go along with that. So make no mistake about it. I mean, J.R. Sandlin, when Rhett Lashley hired him, it didn't get enough play. I mean, people just saw, oh, director of recruiting. Okay, now he's coming to be general manager. What? Thought Alex Brown was in a high level role. Well, when you go and snag somebody from OU who is leading their recruiting efforts, it's a big deal. And so it kind of happened right around the start of spring, maybe a couple days in, or I guess right before spring. And it probably just didn't get the play that it needed and deserved. But now with the switch with Alex Brown heading over to Ole Miss, need to be reiterated. I mean, that was a big hire. He is somebody who's going to be leading the way for SMU into the power conferences in a world where, look, SMU didn't need to recruit the high school ranks like an Oklahoma, like a Texas A&M, a TCU, a Baylor that had Power 5 conferences on their shoulder patch. Now SMU has that, and there's an expectation from Rhett Lashley and obviously many supporters around SMU that it's not just going to be transfer you, so to speak. It's going to be, let's go get a top 25 recruiting class. Let's go get the best of the best in Dallas. And that's what they're shooting for. That's their expectation. And so you go out and bring in someone who has helped lead those efforts at a blue blood program in J.R. Sandlin from OU. So as the priorities shifted, SMU needed to bring in a guy who is very organized when it comes to high school recruiting and leading those efforts. And I think they got that in J.R. Sandlin. So that's kind of the future of SMU recruiting. The Mustangs, we will talk about that visit weekend that is coming up. Trust me, we will certainly do that. I do want to say that SMU football is going to get back on the practice field this week. They have been on spring break, so we've just been kind of running some recruiting updates, some interviews from the past couple of weeks, and of course, basketball wrapped up. So lots more to come to on theponyexpress.com. Please subscribe. Tell your friends. If you're a podcast listener, subscribe to the site. We promise it's worth it. It's $1 for your first month. Just test it out. If you're already a subscriber to the site, tell your friends. Seriously, that's how we grow this site. That's how we continue to bring in guys like Kevin and Jordan to work on the site. It's how we pay the bills for all the things we want to do with this site. So that improving podcast equipment, all the things. So please support the site and subscribe. So with that house cleaning out of the way, SMU basketball. And trust me, guys, we will get back to SMU football next week. I've got a fun podcast planned early in the week, a couple of guests I'm working on. So we'll hopefully get those. But and then SMU football will be actually back on the practice field. But we do have to talk about SMU basketball pretty much the rest of this podcast. And I've got a lot of just rambling thoughts. I've got them at least somewhat organized on a note, but let's go over last night, which if you're listening to this on Friday or sometime this weekend, recording on Friday, SMU lost 75-60 to Temple, the 11th seeded Temple Owls, who were 5-13, I believe it was, in AAC play. They were involved in an investigation around point shaving. So if that even was true, you lost to a team that was at one point or the other trying to lose. I believe it was to UAB to make some money. I mean, Chuck Harris going down was important. He was the leading scorer, 10 points. They all came in that first half. He went down with an ankle injury. He re-injured the one that he had the issue with earlier this year. And no one stepped up. Zurich Phelps, 9 points. Emory Lanier, tied for second with 9 points. Tyreek Smith, 8 points. I don't know where to begin on the Thursday night game. Temple was, and this is probably the biggest red flag, Temple was far more fired up, far more passionate, far more aggressive. And they almost, at certain points, just dictated what they wanted to do with ease. And I know it's hard when you lose Chuck Harris, and we've seen SMU without Chuck Harris. It's not necessarily good. He is a veteran guard. He brings a lot, but he, was trending to having a great game. Don't get me wrong. But if they have Chuck Harris the whole rest of the way, do they win? I don't know. I don't know. It was all bad pretty much for SMU. When you lose by 15 to a team like that, there need to be moments where you look in the mirror and you're wondering what exactly are we doing here? And one note with this loss, SMU for the first time in program history, the second time in program history, has not advanced past their first matchup in the AAC tournament. And last year was the first time. So under Rob Lanier, SMU's not won a game in the AAC tournament. And that was from the ESPN broadcast. So this program is in bad shape right now. And I don't know what happened over the last 6 games. SMU finished losing 5 of their last 6. But when you have expectations to turn this program around, which I think Rob Lanier did, I really do, from the standpoint of you had a poor culture. It was a country club. It was lackadaisical under Tim Jankovich. There was no accountability. And he came in and turned that culture completely upside down. And just watching the program last summer before the first season, and when I went back out this past summer, you could tell these guys were buying in. They were ready. They were staying after practice to work out. They seemed close. We know they returned a good number of players. They also brought in some key pieces this past offseason. They took their absolute lumps in year one because, in part, it was such a stark contrast of styles. offense, go, go, go. Don't play defense. Don't worry about rebounding under Tim Jankovic. Well, we're going to play defense. We're going to hustle our tails off. We're going to crash the glass, do all those things. And the question around Rob Lanier has always been, what the heck is going on offensively? Which once again reared its head without Chuck Harris as SMU scored 60 points. 60. And they allowed Temple to shoot 53% in the second half, including 5 of 9 from three-point range. And the defense faltered late in the season. And now there's so many different ways to think about how to play defense, how to play offense, all those things. There's some coaches that say, if we're rolling on offense, it's a lot easier to get the guys involved because they're saying, okay, all right, like I'm confident, I'm shooting the ball well, and we play some defense, get another possession. There's also if you're dominating a team and you take good shots on the offensive end, you're going to set yourself up for success. But the problem with SMU is they don't take good shots. They really haven't taken good shots all season. There have been moments where they've shown an ability or a flash to share the basketball well, create those good opportunities. But we really haven't seen them do that much when it comes to executing what looks like a semblance of an offense in a sense. And when SMU's shots weren't falling against Temple, when they started to take over the game, they couldn't draw something up and get something going. And so there's a lot of the on-the-court pieces that look with one departing player in Sam Williamson, which leaves 2 scholarships open. There's going to be a lot of questions because SMU does have 2 prospects signed for the class of 2024. They have Mitchell Holmes, a big man from Arlington, and they have Chance Puryear, a 3-star, depending on where you look, prospect from Dallas Carter. And so they bring in someone who you can expect to be brought along in that Sam Williamson role, and you bring in a big man, which we know SMU needed. But currently, SMU is expecting everyone back. Or they have eligibility remaining. And so Denver Anglin, redshirt. Mo and Jai didn't do anything. Xavier Foster didn't do anything. You've got to find ways to bring in more talent to this roster. And not only that, there needs to be a concerted effort to figure out how to make things work on the offensive end. And I do think with the way SMU plays, it comes down to talent, quite frankly. And I think SMU has wasted a lot of talent this year. I look at guys like Tyreek Smith and, Zurich Phelps, even though he led the team in scoring, second team all AAC. Zurich has been one of the more tougher players to evaluate and talk about over his SMU career. He's creeping up the all-time steals list. He is creeping up the all-time points list. He has a lot of things that go his way. But at the same time, we know we haven't seen the best Zurich Phelps that Zurich Phelps can be. And some of that lies in Zurich's hands, but also some of that lies in the coaching staff's hands. How do you get more out of him? When you see Zurich Phelps when he's on, I mean, he should be a 20-plus point a game night, especially in a watered-down AAC, especially for what he's commanded in NIL to stick around. And there are other guys on this roster that have nice deals. There's NIL support for this program. And behind the scenes, if Rob Lanier would galvanize that NIL support by way of getting high-profile transfers, there's going to be more leash when it comes to, well, can this work? They're still flipping the culture. Look at the talent he's bringing in. But it's been this kind of, I don't know the right word for it. And I don't want to say patchwork because some of these players are good players and have a lot of talent. Look at BJ Edwards. You could see the talent flashing, and he's done some good things. He also did some not so good things. He's also very young. But when you look at Zurich Phelps' development as a veteran who's in his basically money years, kind of, can BJ Edwards take a massive step next year? Maybe. He's got to. He's got to for SMU to be a threat to do anything in the ACC, because one thing we don't know the answer to is, will Rob Lanier cut some of the talent who isn't participating? Mo and Jai, Xavier Foster. And I love Mo. Like, what he brings to the bench, and it just hasn't worked out for whatever reason. But when you're going into a league like that and you're going to have two freshmen who I don't know how much they'll really be able to contribute. Freshmen are kind of a wild card. Could you be Sterling Brown, or could you be, I don't know, something else? You're going to have two roster spots right there of guys that you hope pan out quickly, but also could be developmental pieces and take time. Mo and Jai, Xavier Foster, that's 4. You've got to make moves this offseason if you're back. And so there's a roster construction piece that has to find a way to be directed in a more positive direction, because there aren't pieces that are necessarily being brought in that were talented enough at one thing to make this team great. Like Tyreek Smith, I love Tyreek Smith. I've known him for years. I mean, it's almost a decade he's been on the scene. That's, just kind of COVID, how it is. But he wasn't elite, but he was going to be counted on to be elite in something to bring SMU up a level in the front court. And Keon Ambrose Hilton ends up being probably the best front court player, in my opinion. Jaheim Hudson, the probably least heralded transfer. I said it last offseason. I think Jaheim Hudson's going to make an impact. He did. But he's got to be, in my opinion, he's got to be your third, maybe fringe second guy on the wing in the ACC. Again, I've said this. I encourage you guys to go watch ACC basketball. Watch the rest of their tournament now that SMU doesn't have games. There are some absolute monsters in that league. And now another unknown. We don't know if Rob Lanier and SMU will rise to the level that you need to. If they do, at minimum, let's say, have Xavier Foster, Mo, and Jai spots available, we don't know if they'll rise to that level where they'll bring in an absolute stud transfer for the front court, or bring in a stud transfer to replace Sam Williamson, quite honestly. Because if you're going to say, okay, Zurich Phelps, BJ Edwards, Chuck Harris, if you get another level out of those guys, that's a pretty good group right there. Jalen Smith, need to continue to elevate, need to find it. He's been here 3 years now. Denver Anglin, can you come out of nowhere after redshirting and be a dude? Ricardo Wright, can you continue to raise your level of play, but how much higher can you really go? Those are hard questions to ask, but they're honestly probably realistic questions. And so if that roster is built this way, you need an absolute stud big man from the transfer portal, and you probably need a replacement for Samuel Williamson, a starter who is going to be a very much elevated level of Samuel Williamson. And I like what Samuel Williamson did for SMU as far as changing the culture and trying and working his absolute tail off. But we know he's hurt. We know his story and how it just hasn't panned out. So there's no ill will there, but you have to upgrade that position in such a big way. And this year's roster was built for the AAC. There wasn't a lifeboat. Actually, we were at the point where the lifeboat wasn't in a good spot. It had been months since the Pac-12 had looked like it was going to do something. And then it was trying, and then it was waiting on a deal. And I mean, it was probably the most dire, in a sense, time when building this. There was no like, hey, come here for a year. We're going to a power conference. There was just all this waiting and negativity around the Pac-12 by the time this summer rolled around, when last spring and summer, when they tried to put together this roster. And so you're not going to have ACC level of players coming here last year, but you didn't know you were going. You didn't know you were for sure going to the Pac-12. Now they know they're going to the ACC. What can that do for the level of prospect or transfer player that they go after? We've seen them take their swings. We've seen them get into some big 2025 recruitments, and they're in there. Will they land them? I don't know. But on the transfer front, which is most important because SMU is going into the ACC, where it absolutely needs to make a good impression, you've got to be able to bring in two absolute studs. And that's if Mo and Xavier move on. You have to. And what does that require in today's age of college basketball? NIL and working that recruiting effort that you expect Rob Lanier to do and his staff to do, which I think they do know how to recruit. What I am concerned with is I don't know how much they want to play in the NIL sandbox. And maybe it's got to be the real right fit and the right situation. But I can tell you, there's some top players for SMU that commanded serious coin. And so they play in the space. But when you're talking about the ACC and you see that schedule that came out, and there's Duke and Louisville and Syracuse and Virginia, and we don't even know the non-conference, but Rob schedules pretty well. Are you really not going to play in the NIL space? He's not too keen on it. But you want to know what would cover up a lot of the deficiencies that this team has had from time to time? Two absolute ballers. And that takes NIL, and it takes galvanizing it, and it takes saying, hey, look at what we did on the defensive end. We know we've got to get better offensively. And it was abysmal. And there are many examples of that. But you want to know what I'm going to do? So-and-so in the collective? I'm going to take care of that. I trust so-and-so on this team and that guy on this team and this player that we've got coming back. Here's why. But here's why we need to go out and get one of the top wings in the transfer portal. We're going to the ACC. It's one of the best basketball conferences, if not the best basketball conference in America. And we're going to have Duke, and we're going to have Louisville, and we're going to have all these teams. And if we don't want to get boat raced by them in Moody Coliseum, we got to be able to make shots. We got to have a wing that can really allow us to spread the floor, and they're going to have to respect his three-point shooting. You want to look at some of the offensive issues that SMU's had at times? Well, they don't need to play out on Sam Williamson, and he's a wing. I mean, you've got to find somebody who can knock it down and be athletic. Those threes in the ACC, they're freaks. They're absolute freaks. They all look like Ben Moore and shoot like Sterling Brown. Not all of them, but they can really go. And those types of players are so important to get from the high school ranks and the transfer portal. And that's the type of player that SMU needs to go out and get. And I haven't seen evidence that we should expect that. And they need a big man who can hang with some of these absolute trees that are in the ACC. I mean, with all due respect to Keon and Tyreek, I mean, anybody watch DJ Burns at NC State? You know, I mean, this is not, it's hard to play small ball against some of these programs. So if Rob Lanier is indeed back, which I think he will be, he's got to address and go full blown, or somebody on his staff has to go full blown KT Turner getting Kendrick Davis for Tim Jankovich mode. I mean, that's one of the biggest reasons why Jank was able to stay all those years. I mean, KT delivered him Kendrick Davis on his way out. Somebody's got to go out and get a star for SMU. And they need one. They absolutely need one from an energy perspective for this program. Zurich Phelps needs to develop just a touch more maturity, and I like Zurich a lot. And I think he has a ton of basketball potential. But after 3 years, people are ready for him to take the next step in being a leader. Think about when Zurich came into this program. He had a chance to really be a Shake Milton, a Nick Moore type with the level of play he's capable of. And if he developed the mental maturity to be that type of leader, fan favorite, but it just hasn't been perfect in that regard. SMU needs to bring in a star, which leads me to my next point. I think Rob Lanier is going to be back. As I sit here recording this podcast, what I do know is that there are a lot of people that are already just cooked out, not on the train anymore. And if you listen to Rob Lanier, since he's got the job, press conferences, all of those things, he talks a heck of a game. And he's backed it up at some points. To change over the culture like he has in terms of defense or, offense, country club, Tim Jankovic, to defense, hard-nosed practice. And his practices are no picnic, trust me. Like, I've watched them. He has backed up some of his talk. But he absolutely needs to raise it to another level. And I think he's going to be back. I think he's going to get a third year. And he's going to get an opportunity. And maybe, as he put it in his introductory press conference, maybe he deserves it. Maybe he deserves, hey, let's see if he, it's a weird time for SMU basketball with all the conference realignment that was involved, but nothing was a sure thing. And maybe it really was wearing on players and they really weren't coming because SMU was, in a watered down AAC. I mean, Hyzier Miller, who scored 21 points for Temple, took an SMU official visit while he was in the transfer portal last offseason, and he ended up returning to Temple, and then he bounces SMU from the AAC tournament. And that was kind of poetic. But an SMU operated with an empty scholarship this year. Could have gone to him, but they couldn't close it, which I get. He's involved in Philadelphia. He's a Philly kid, all those things. But when I think some issues for some coaches are this, and I think Rob Lanier is now in this boat. When you have capital with your fan base, when you have money to spend, let's say, and you can't, when things aren't going well, be almost holding a toy over here while that's happening and saying, but man, he's not year one. He's losing. It's tough, but he's out in the community. He's being active. He's promoting the brand. He's trying to galvanize support because, that's what he needs to be doing. SMU had a guy who didn't galvanize anything when it came to community support in Tim Jankovic. And there was so much, I think apathy is the right word, around the program. And now that apathy is back. So much. And yes, he went from 10 wins to 20 wins. Great job. You improved the program. But you are taking a program in a watered down league and you showed the fan base what this team could be and what it was trending like. And then everything that everybody said about the team, which is that they hadn't beaten anybody good. I think they had one quad one win. And they enter the critical stretch with a top 4 seed in the AAC tournament secured. At that point, they had a chance to win the AAC regular season. And what they do, they lost 4 of their last 5 regular season games. And they lost them from anywhere to the class of the conference in FAU and USF to an absolute bottom feeder in UTSA that just fired their coach and literally plays in a 1950s basketball gym. And they got the metal bars, and I don't even know if they have a video board. I mean, just pathetic resources, quite honestly, for UTSA. And some people down there would back that up. And they lose in Moody to that program. And then knowing you need a little bit of momentum, you go to UAB and you let them come back and beat you. There are so many pieces of this season that you can point to and say, whoa, there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. He just needs to maybe get 2 more dudes and do that in the offseason, and maybe they'll be able to compete a little bit in the ACC. But what this last month did was show that they are so far away from competing in the ACC. It's going to be an embarrassing first year in the league unless he goes and blows up some of this roster and goes out and acquires dogs. And that is no disrespect to the guys that are on this roster. Just some of them aren't ACC guys. And that's okay. Like what Ricardo Wright did this year, awesome. What a nice story to see him break out, be that 3-point shooter. He was critical during that stretch when they were picking things up in the conference. And then he, kind of disappeared when the, good competition came to play. And so I just think he's going, there are certain pieces of this roster that just probably need to just move on. But when this team lost that stretch and limped into the AAC tournament, you thought, okay, they maybe just needed a reset. They're going to be 40 minutes from home, and they're playing the Temple Owls, 11 seed, average team, first-year head coach. SMU's culture has got to be taken hold here. They can slow down Hyzier Miller and, who else? And get through this game and move on. Even when Chuck Harris got hurt, I'm pretty sure that game was turning into a dogfight. Even with the nice start that SMU had. And so again, you burned all this capital in the last month with the fan base. There's no engagement within the community. There's no engagement on social media. There's basically just the SMU Basketball Twitter account just posting cool graphics and pictures of the guys, which plays with the players. Trust me, I get it. And we've seen that on various sports and to various levels. And it matters from a perception standpoint, but not with your fan base. When they see, okay, going to the ACC, man, like where is the energy around this program? And for the team to, I don't want to say quit, but God, they look so bad against Temple and against UTSA, that how do you kind of recover from that and then move forward as a program in a positive direction? I don't know. So let's kind of close with this because I've been going on long enough. Rob Lanier's future. I don't think he's going to fire anyone on his staff. Maybe guys move on or go elsewhere. Who knows? But I just don't see it. I think a part of his entire plan is having continuity and people who demand the same from the culture, which I think early in the season and at the midway point, we looked up and you were like, okay, that's what happens when you have a strong culture. You have guys that are playing their tails off and putting it together. And then once the team faced adversity in terms of good teams, it all disappeared, which showed the massive talent gap. And so that has to be addressed. How do you address the talent gap? Your coaches recruiting and galvanizing some support from your supporters. And SMU has the resources. But I just don't think he really wants to dabble in the NIL space as much as he probably should as a now coach of an ACC basketball team. And there's a way to do it where you don't have hired mercenaries who are making, $7 million a year roster and things like that. There's a way not to do that. I'm not advocating for that. But there's a way to get out there and bring in top talent that will still play hard for you. And they are talented enough that they're going to make the difference and be worth what you're putting together for them from an NIL perspective. So if Rob Lanier is still the head coach at SMU, like I expect him to be, he has to put together an off season to remember. And it is the only way that happens is if you get players, dudes, find a way to galvanize a fan base, because he is out of capital to spend. He really is. There's too much that went down in a negative direction over the last month that he can walk into the ACC and be feeling good about where he stands. And the other piece to that in terms of his future is if he does get that third year, Rick Hart, President Turner, the entire group that supports SMU basketball, there needs to be some sort of way that you sit down beforehand and find a way to outline what success looks like. Because if you told me before the season, and if SMU does get an NIL or NIT bid, if you told me before the season Rob Lanier took SMU to 20 wins and took him to the NIT, I'd say, okay, progress. It's pretty good. But it's how. And it's how over the past year there hasn't been enough positive momentum in terms of bringing in talent, and talent that really contributes at a high level. And there's just production on the court that speaks to that as well. This was a team that was probably playing well enough that they shouldn't be dogged by 10 points against FAU, USF, shouldn't blow a lead to UAB down the stretch, definitely shouldn't lose to UTSA. And then you lose by 15, 40 minutes away from your home court in Fort Worth with everything on the line in a way in the AAC tournament. I mean, Tim Jankovic, for all the things that, people didn't like about how he ran the program, at least they won a game, at least one in the AAC tournament each time. So if you're Rick Hart, if you're President Turner, if you're the leadership around the program, there needs to be a come to Jesus type of meeting within that group. And it doesn't need to include Rob Lanier at this point. What does success look like? Because Larry Brown spoiled SMU fans in a way because of all the things he did and all of the excitement around the program, even though it was kind of a train wreck at certain points, and certainly the NCAA stuff is not good. But he still didn't win an NCAA tournament game. Like, let's be very clear on that. But he won a good basketball conference. And there was times where it was obviously heartbreaking the way SMU lost some of those NCAA tournament games. So don't get me wrong. It's not like they've got boat raced and things like that. And there was a trend, at least, that they were going to be competitive just about every year. SMU doesn't need to be what Larry Brown was building it into be. What SMU needs is to find a way where the group that evaluates the basketball program is on the same page with what you want to accomplish. Because part of the reason why I think Rob Lanier is going to stay for another year is I don't think they're on the same page. I think David Miller put together hundreds of millions of dollars not to get boat raced by Duke, Louisville, Syracuse, whoever else comes into Moody and just has its way with the current state of SMU basketball. I don't think that's how he envisioned that happening. I don't think he's on board with that at all. And I think if everyone could come together and be on the same page about that, I think he would be more than happy to write the check and make a change and go get somebody who really wants to do the basic things that, like it or not, with a small school, just needs to be done. This is a school that you walk into Moody Coliseum and you probably know many of the people that are around. You know George W. Bush is going to be sitting right there. You know David Miller's right next to him. President Turner on the other side. Brad Cheese. Like, it's a community. And when you don't engage in the community, you lose all that capital right there. You should. And that should be a bare minimum, basic thing with anyone who SMU tries to hire for just about any sport. I mean, look at Toya Wilson, wanted to come on the podcast earlier in the year, and hopefully it works out for her. They had injuries, bad year for her. But she's engaged, and I've seen her. I mean, she's meticulous. And I'm not going into the women's basketball program because I don't know it close enough. But when you look at that level of engagement and want to, at least, there is, okay, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But when there's so many little things that you're watching with the program, it's like, what? And then he doesn't engage and it's almost like you don't want to be here. That group should be on the same page that is a major red flag. That's probably the biggest red flag I have with Rob Lanier right now, because I think he's doing it right, building the culture. I don't know if he's going to be able to get the type of players he needs in the ACC, which is his job to do. But my biggest red flag is where his program stands when it comes to engagement with the student body, with the community, and all those things. And I think once the group that evaluates the performance of SMU basketball gets on the same page with some of the very basic things like that, and I do think it is, for whatever reason, I don't think Rick Hart and President Turner are to that point where they want to push back and say, come on, let's go, get it going, tour the fraternities, tour the sororities, go speak to Student Senate, go speak to whoever, go get out a little bit, because SMU students and also SMU fans, rightfully or wrongfully, want to feel a little bit back. They want you to meet them like a quarter of the way. Like, they do. They really do. I mean, look at what Chad Morris did. And the on-field play at certain points was horrible, laughable, especially defensively. But he was out there working it, and so people were like, okay, all right, still going to try to ride with him. And you knew how it ended. You knew that if he had stuck around for one more year, it was going to be an absolute train wreck without Cortland Sutton and Trey Quinn. It was going to be so bad. But they just want a little bit from you. And for whatever reason, the leadership in that piece doesn't want to push back and say, hey, come on, let's go. It's my opinion. Watching it unfold. I do think that they recognize that he should, in the grand scheme of things, because of the way the program is at least trended, get another year, get an opportunity to show what recruiting to the ACC would look like under his direction. What I worry about is a lot of what I've covered. I think there's a casualness about acquiring talent. I think there's a casualness about engaging with anyone in the fan base or community to make it a program that people should support and be excited about. And that casualness scares me when you're looking at this program and its future. And it should scare the administration. And sometimes life isn't fair. And I am torn on if he should get a third year, truthfully. I'm torn. But what I see is so many red flags that if they made a move and they said, you know what? 2 years ago, SMU hired Rob Lanier. They hired him to be the coach of an AAC team that had a bright past in the recent history and had a chance to ascend with a conference in transition that was going to be losing some other top schools. But they weren't in a power conference. They were hoping to be in a power conference. And so they hired him and they said, you know what, maybe he just needs a different situation and we have resources. We have the ability to give him that. And instead, what's happened is there's been that apathy that's come back into the program. And it's scary. And it's not the job that SMU made a hire for when they hired Rob Lanier and they pursued Grant McCaslin and all those things. It's not. It's an ACC basketball job in the heart of Dallas, Texas, with a really impressive basketball facility, both with Crum and Moody, with a fan base that, you know, if you meet them just a little bit, they'll be out there. They'll be ready. They'll be waiting to support. I thought the Memphis game was awesome. But when you don't give them that all the time, or at least, let's say, give them what you normally give them all the time, even if it's like 30% of maybe what it should be, they're not going to show up when things go bad, and they're not going to have your back, and they're going to want to fire you like many people do right now. This job is not the job Rob Lanier was hired for. And sometimes when things like that change, it's okay to make a change. And I don't think SMU is. I think Rob has done enough to probably get that third year and no one blink an eye nationally. But when you look at the collapse they just had, no one would blink an eye if they made a move. And sometimes, and SMU didn't have this with Tim Jankovic, sometimes you've got to see where the road is leading. And based on what I've seen, it's very concerning about where the future is headed for SMU basketball. They keep swinging on big recruits. They've had some on campus. They offer some. They recruit them hard. But you gotta produce, and you gotta give somebody something to get excited about and embrace. And that's where Rob Lanier and his staff right now are falling well below expectations in a critical, pivotal moment for this program. I'm not worried about if SMU does go through, a longer future with Rob Lanier, of what it does long term to the job. It's a program and a job that is coveted, and it should be. But sometimes you have to be able to make hard decisions, and if they're not going to move on from him, they need to have hard, brutally honest conversations and everyone get on the same page as far as what they need out of this program moving forward. Because it is such a massive opportunity for SMU to impress, between the facilities, between the performance on the court in ACC basketball. I mean, it's just as big as football in that sense. So if SMU isn't going to be that type of program that wants to and demands the best, then we're going to be in this spot for a minute, and we're going to have nights like Thursday night. I know David Miller wants to have that elite level of program. I know it. He'll spend whatever, but it's a group right now, and the group needs to figure out what is the best path to reaching that elite level and what changes need to be made to avoid nights like Thursday night and 5 of the last 6 to end this season. So with that, guys, I know, long one, I told you, but we'll be watching to see Sunday night if SMU lands in the NIT, and cover the season until it ends. And if there's a change, we'll have everything covered for you at ontheponyexpress.com. So hope you guys, the couple of you that are still listening, have a great weekend, and we will catch you next time on another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast.
Thanks for listening to the On the Pony Express podcast with Billy Embody. Follow us on your socials on X at SMU_on3 and on Instagram at On3SMU. And keep it locked to ontheponyexpress.com for more coverage.